Good. Okay, we actually have a small group today, and I don't see Wendy, who actually was the creator of our topic. She originally proposed this matriarch theme. Maybe she will come in a minute, but I just wanted to thank her again. And here we are to talk about the second generation of the matriarchs. We started with Sarah last time, and we're going to continue with Rebekah this time. In just a minute, we'll say our Torah prayer, which we always do when we're learning together. But I wanted to comment on how prevalent even today these biblical matriarch names are. Like, how many people do you know who are named Sarah, Rebekah, maybe less Leah, but Rachel is a very common one. Enid? You know people. Okay, so these names have been passed down through the generations, and still today they are very frequently used as Jewish names, which I just think is interesting. Okay, let us offer our learning prayer together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav.
Divrei Torah. And
Wonderful.
Rabbi, do you want everybody muted?
I think so, until it's someone's turn to talk, they can
I'm
unmute.
going to mute, and you'll have to unmute now.
There we go. Okay, so our lens on these matriarchs, like we spoke about last time, is these folks are given to us not as saints, not as demigods, not as people whose lives we're supposed to emulate, but as human beings who face the challenge of living a life, just like each one of us faces, which is enormously illuminating. They're basically people like us. Even though they lived in a much more ancient time, they're still grappling with what it means to be in relationships, to make choices facing the constraints that they face, just like we have to make choices facing whatever constraints we face. They're really real people like us. They make mistakes like all human beings do. They do things that are you really actually, wouldn't want to model your life after, but you can learn from the fact that they struggled through whatever they had to face and did the best they could. And that is what we each need to do as well. I love it that Judaism gives us role models in this way about what it means to be human, not as some kind of perfected standard. Because what's real for us is we have to figure out how to be human in our own contexts. And that's what they did. Who here read the texts about Rebekah's life? Of course, we come across these Torah texts every year in our cycle of readings, but who read them for this class? Okay, wow, Beverly, yay. Well, I think we probably have a lot of shared knowledge about Rebekah, but I'll also be reminding us. Now, once again, when we read these texts, well, Louisa did too. Louisa read the text. Thanks, Louisa. We notice when we read these biblical texts always that the Torah is written through the eyes of men for men. Did you notice that, Beverly and Louisa, when you were reading the stories of Rebekah? Okay, so the Torah was not actually written about Rebekah exactly. It was written about Rebekah as she related to the men, the patriarchs in her life. And we don't really know what was going on in Rebekah's inner world because we're not told that. There's a lot of imagining we can do. In a certain way, we have one half of what should be the Torah, right? We have what came down to us through men. But the other half, which was women's actual experience and stories, is missing from the Torah. We just have these glimpses, these little clues. And some of you are familiar with the teaching, the mystical teaching, that the Torah, the written scroll, is the black letters written on the empty white space. You know this teaching? The black letters written on the white space, and that the black letters tell those stories that were handed down by the men, mostly about the men, or at least from the vantage point of the men. But the white space is where we, all the people who were not included in that original transmission, we get to write the story of our lives. And we get to read into, with imagination, the story of our matriarchs' lives. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to look at Rebekah's life in three different stages. Early on, we encounter Rebekah through the quest of Abraham, the founding father of Judaism, to find a wife for his son Isaac. And interestingly, Abraham decides that he has to find a wife for his son Isaac in the land that Sarah came from. And we're going to ask, why was it important that Isaac's wife come from the land Sarah came from? Because remember, the land that Sarah came from was a land where the mother religion was worshipped, right? And where we even have a theory that maybe Sarah was a priestess in that religion, which was about fertility and about nature, and it was polytheistic. For some reason, it was important to Abraham to go look for a wife for his kid in this land of, matriarchal power and religion, back in Sarah's land. And this was very, very important to Abraham because he makes a whole plan that's documented in the Torah. And this actually happens in several different generations in our founding mothers, that they find wives for the boys back in the land where the mother came from. And that isn't even a place where they are now. Like Abraham and Sarah are now living in the land of Israel, but he sends Eliezer, his servant, back to Sarah's homeland, his homeland too, to find a wife for the next generation, for his son Isaac. This is another part of the theory that maybe Sarah actually had a lot of kind of spiritual standing, in that she had the power maybe behind the scenes to say, look, we're going to have to find a way to carry on my part of this heritage. And it's really important to me that a wife for this next generation come from my cultural, spiritual tradition. And that happens several times as they build those founding generations. So Eliezer is Abraham's servant, and Eliezer gets sent to find the wife for Isaac. So Eliezer treks over to that part of the world, and he's actually very worried that maybe the designated person he finds for Isaac's wife won't follow him, like won't actually come with him. We know he's worried about that because he actually, the Torah narrator tells us that Eliezer is worried about this. And then later it's said again when Eliezer is talking, once he gets to that land, to the people there, to Rebekah's relatives. And Eliezer says, I was really worried that this person I find isn't going to come with me. She won't follow me. So let's ask us, what does that worry tell us about Rebekah's agency in the marriage arrangement? Let's think about that. The fact that Eliezer is worried that she won't follow him. What does that tell us about her agency in the whole process? Enid, you can unmute.
Well, it tells me that she, as a woman, has a choice, and it's up to her to make that choice.
Yeah.
Which is interesting in itself.
Yeah.
That this kind of choice is made. So you don't abduct her, you don't kidnap her. It's up to her to make that decision. Now, the influence of her family is something else that I don't know if we know that.
No, that's a good point. So all the official arrangements are being made between men about this marriage. It's right. It's Eliezer representing Abraham, and there's Laban, and you know, Rebekah's family representing Rebekah. But actually, Rebekah gets to choose. Her family delayed her leaving. Her family says in the Torah, can't you linger for 10 more days? Just stay around for 10 more days. Don't leave. And that does take place. And the family apparently is kind of hoping that after the 10 days, Rebekah will choose not to go with Eliezer off to Isaac. But again, Rebekah kind of defies her own family, which apparently is kind of pushing for her to stay in her homeland. And she says, yes, I'm going to go. So that is interesting that there's some consent and agency in a patriarchal context. Like, I mean, ultimately it was the men negotiating this and making the arrangement. Okay, so why do you think Rebekah wanted to go off to this strange land with to an unknown husband? Anybody want to speculate? Because we don't really know. Bobby, what do you think?
Adventure?
Yeah, I could imagine it.
Or maybe there was something unspoken about feelings about her family that she wanted to get away from. I mean, I'm just thinking of contemporary reasons people do this stuff.
Yeah, we could really do some interesting midrash about why Rebekah chose to go off into this new family tree. It was an interfaith choice too, right? Because she hadn't grown up with what was becoming Judaism. Evie, and then Louisa.
Similar thought. Maybe she was unhappy and it was a good way to leave.
Yeah, Louisa.
And I was going to say escapism, that she was trying to escape the confines because of what she does later on in life. She wants to be part of something different. She doesn't want to be just a follower.
Really interesting. She kind of wants to become a self, grow into herself. Maybe not just follow the same old pattern that all the people in her family tree had followed up until then. Who knows? But when you sort of see yourself in Rebekah at a very young age, can you connect with choices you made for some reason that was complicated, like maybe needing to get away from a family situation and it looked like salvation? That's something that a lot of people do at young ages. It looks exciting and adventurous, and right? It looks like what you're supposed to do for the next stage of life, get married or whatever the thing is. Can you put yourself in that motivational space and kind of relate to Rebekah in a way as somebody who made that huge choice, maybe for complicated reasons that we don't totally know? The problem was then she actually ends up living a life with Isaac. So she's in a distant land in a Jewish family, which was not how she was raised, married to Isaac. Now let's think about what we know about Isaac. What do you know about Isaac, her new husband? We know a lot about Isaac from the story of the binding of Isaac, which we read on the second day of Yom Kippur, of Rosh Hashanah every single year, the Akedah. So what do we know about the main event of Isaac's life? Because this is the man she married. What do we know about him?
Well, we know that he's the son of Abraham.
He's the son of Abraham.
And we know that he's been through this traumatic experience, although I'm not aware of the Torah telling us his feelings or his I mean, I just don't know.
Yeah.
Had any reaction to that.
This horrible, terrible thing took place with him on the mountain with his own father holding a knife over his throat. And we can imagine that was a terrifying and awful experience for him that shaped the rest of his life. So let's talk about trauma, because Rebekah married Isaac. So let's talk about trauma. So trauma is not just a bad thing that happens to someone. Everyone has bad things that happen to them. Everybody has kind of hurtful, difficult, awful things that ever happen in a life. But what makes it trauma is that it overwhelms your own coping mechanism at that stage of life, and you're in it alone. You have no relational home to help hold the horror. That's trauma. Some people think trauma is just, it's the thing that happened. That isn't what trauma is. Like the understanding of trauma is that it is something that's bigger than your own system can handle alone at the time that you face it, and you're in it alone. There's no relational home for it. So if you think about it, all over the world, there are refugees, which it's a very difficult situation to be a refugee. But if you're in it with your family, you're all in it together, and there's a lot of love and care and mutual aid and the whole thing. It's a very different experience than if you're a single person who's like sent out to flee by yourself with no emotional home, no resource for that. So think about Isaac. What we know from the binding of Isaac in Genesis is that the very next Torah portion, when Isaac comes down off the mountain, starts with Sarah died. Sarah was his primary person, his mama. We know she had protected him from Ishmael when Ishmael was doing mocking or rough play. We know that from the Torah. Sarah was his mother who loved him and cherished him and wanted to raise him up and protect him. She died the minute he got down the mountain. His mom's not there anymore. So do you think he had a relational home for this terrible experience he had just come through with his dad? Clearly not. We don't actually know the inner life of Isaac or how that showed up in symptoms. But what we do know is we know what standard reactions to trauma are. And you all know these too. Standard reactions to trauma that just are embedded in our biology are fight, flight, or flee. So let's just imagine ourselves into what Rebekah had to deal with in her marriage, into her relationship, right? When she said yes to this adventure, she had no idea. How many of you can relate to that? You say yes to something that looks pretty good and you have no idea. And you're soon in way over your head. So let's just play it out. So Isaac had experienced this terrible trauma. His father's trying to kill him. His mother dies. And then he's married, he eventually marries Rebekah. So if he was doing flight, what that means in a relationship is that anytime anything difficult or intimate comes up, the partner disappears. It's flight. They can't handle anything that might lead to discomfort, pain, stress, so they withdraw. They're missing in action from the relationship. They stonewall, or they literally go away. They go out with their buddies or drinking or watching TV. They zone out. They're not emotionally present. That's the flight response. It's a trauma response. Another trauma response is to fight. So let's imagine Rebekah is married to this man who's living in his trauma reaction, likely from what we know about him. And what would fighting look like? Well, you can kind of picture it, right? Like, okay, and the other one, there's flight. Oh, and the other one is freeze. So the other one is just to be completely, the person looks like they're present, but is actually emotionally frozen. Like there's not a fluid responsiveness or interactiveness. So let's picture our foremother, Rebekah, in the second generation of the matriarchs in this really difficult situation. we certainly don't ever hear in the story about Isaac getting any healing help. Like lots of people do overcome trauma, either because of love or because of therapy or because of something else that happens in their life. But we don't hear of anything like that happening with Isaac. But we do know from the first stage of Rebekah's life that we talked about that she had a lot of inner strength. She could make up her own mind. And she definitely hung in there. And the next stage of what happens to her is she is pregnant with the twins. But actually, before we, I want to say one more thing about trauma, which is that everybody has, every human being is shaped by the pain and the resilience that we go through in our own individual life. We do know that. And like I said, it's only trauma if it overwhelms the resources at hand and there's no holding relational zone. There was a huge study a number of years ago called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, the ACE study, and some of you may have heard of that, looking at experiences in childhood that were really difficult experiences, like losing a parent at a young age, or living in extreme poverty, or facing a big medical childhood issue, those kind of things, like very difficult experiences. And then studying how people managed later in life. And those difficult things aren't good for people. They're risk factors. But a lot of the kids came out okay because there'd be a single protective factor of like a relationship, a teacher, or an aunt, or, an adoptive family or some place that made that okay. So I just wanted to kind of not leave it at that when bad things happen, you're ruined for life. That actually isn't what's true. And nevertheless, we don't know of any kind of resource for Isaac that would have helped him in a way that would have helped him be a good partner for Rebekah. So he was likely a traumatized partner. And now Rebekah is pregnant, wrestling. There's a struggle in her own womb. Let's think sort of metaphorically about what that struggle could have meant to her. Is the Torah telling us something beyond biologically she's pregnant with twins and is she tugged in one direction and tugged in another direction? Let's think about it metaphorically. And how could we relate to Sarah, I mean, in this case, to Rebekah, as somebody who was going through a really kind of difficult, confusing pull in opposite directions. And can you imagine what that might have been? Can anybody narrate that for us, for imagining your way into Rebekah's life, having ever been in a situation where you feel pulled this way and pulled that way? Has anyone ever felt an internal struggle where you're torn? Enid?
Yeah, I'm wondering who her support system was, if she had one. And back to Isaac, and just for a second, and his trauma, Rebekah also had left by choice her safety net to go to an unknown land. So she may have been able to be some kind of support for him in terms of maybe dealing, because I don't know that she ever saw her family again. And so they were just two thoughts that came to mind.
Yeah, we know she had a lot of inner strength and determination.
Right.
That's a really good question. What was her support system? Susan, are you? Yeah. You're on mute, Susan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I know from my own experience, when you're pregnant and you're carrying new life, etc. But with Rebekah, or some of us also, not just Rebekah, and you're in a tenuous situation in your relationship, and it's a struggle, you wonder, well, I would wonder, what am I bringing these children into?
Mm.
And what kind of life are they gonna have? Am I gonna have to really sustain them over Isaac because he's traumatized and not able to relate? So I think there's sort of first maybe the joy of knowing that you're bringing in new life, but then a lot of fear and concern and worry of how is he going to be a father? How is this going to work? Will I have more burdens to hold the emotional part of the relationship, etc.?
Wow. Susan, I love that. I mean, yeah, sort of joy and fear wrestling with each other. And if you think about it, this was already a pretty fraught family, right? Isaac and Ishmael, Sarah and Hagar, like this family was not in great shape. I mean, it probably also had a lot going for it, a lot of love and a lot of kind of commitment to continuity and whatever. But it was a fraught family. The first Jewish family is a family that shows us that families are complicated and difficult. They're complex. Families are not such, beds of roses. They're complicated. And I think every single person here has probably had the experience. I'm just looking around this particular Zoom room, knowing our lives here. Families are complicated. And if you think there's some vision of, family perfection, it's likely a little bit of a mirage, because what's real about families is there's love, there's care, there's commitment, there's also jealousy and struggle and people with dual narratives who have really different ways of looking at things that are complicated. So Rebekah really might have been struggling with joy about being pregnant and with fear about what is she bringing this child into. And she might have been under-resourced, being so far from her own people. She's with Isaac's family in Isaac's land. What else might have been that tug and struggle within her? Fran?
Well, number one, she didn't know she had twins, probably at that point. And so, she didn't have any role models for, she might have had, women who were pregnant or that way. And maybe she didn't know how she would support this life or whether she was going to get the support she needed. I mean, I've had situations where I've had job offers to go leave home, to go to other places, and then, the security of what's known. So it's sort of the whole unknown versus what's known. And personally, I always end up with the known versus the unknown. It seems like earlier in life, I was able to make the choices of going with the unknown a little bit easier than now in the known. As I've gotten older, it's been a lot harder. So, maybe she and herself, she was okay. She had that initial adventure. She went off. It was the unknown. It was great. But, now she's responsible. She knows she's got to bring up these people. So, I'm not able to make that choice anymore. I've got to sort of stay put.
Right. Yeah. Louisa.
She had been in marriage for 20 years before she became pregnant, and they thought she was barren. So, that because they're both older, she's no longer young and he's no longer younger, I should say. But there was also, and she probably knew the story from him from hearing about his traumas and wondered, how is he going to relate to this child or these children? And is he going to have to make that decision later on, much like the trauma that he was through? So therefore, she was looking at, and what I got from the story was that basically he took the eldest child and she took the youngest child, even though they were twins, and each one had one child as their, I don't know what the word is, their mold, I could say.
Mhm.
While she also had the slave wives as her support.
Yeah. We're going to talk more about the choice of the kids in just a moment. Thank you. So, I mean, it's something I could sort of metaphorically imagine her struggling with is, should I stay or should I go? Maybe I should,
Mhm.
you know? But I think in a lot of relationships, people, even if you choose to stay, but people reach a juncture where you're actually asking, should I stay or should I go? Like, relationships, there's incredible blessings and there's incredible challenges. And a lot of times people get to a point, and she might have gotten to that point. Should I stay with all the known comforts of being in a situation I already know, or should I go? And of course, that would have meant going back to her home people. She couldn't just be an independent person being like divorced. That didn't exist back then, because there would have been no way for her to support herself. But should she go back to her people? I could just imagine that. We're really reading into that wrestle in her womb, which we're invited to do, because she was definitely torn. But as it turns out, she has these twins, and they turn out to have completely different personalities. Esau is like kind of impulsive and physical. He likes to go out and hunt. And, he's kind of a boy. And Isaac really can relate to that. For whatever reason, Isaac kind of sees Esau as like his cherished, chosen son. And he was, in fact, the first son. Rebekah was much more drawn to the personality and the nature of Jacob. Jacob liked to read, he liked to cook, he was sort of a domestic person. And Rebekah was drawn to this one. So there was a lot of polarization in this family. I mean, the father chose a favorite, the mother chose a favorite. You could see these lines of struggle coming down through the generations. And then we see how Rebekah exercises her agency and her determination to have a voice in shaping the future of the Jewish people. We know that back then at that time, women did not have public power. There were not women rabbis or priests or public leaders of any kind at all. But what we're learning from these stories is the way women exercised private power, like power in the context of the family, by making a lot of choices about what the next generation would look like, what names they would get, who would marry who. So we're kind of looking at private power as opposed to public power. And I wonder, we have people here, now in the world, there's many more opportunities for women to have public positions of power, to be out there in the world. But many of you lived through that transformative set of decades where we had to burst open that split and really fight for women to get to be rabbis, for women to get to be federation presidents, for women, so would anybody like to just comment on that, the two lanes, and how we're, what do you think about that public-private split? Is one of those more powerful than the other? We can see how women are exercising an awful lot of power in the family tree, right? Sarah, by casting out Hagar and kind of choosing Isaac as Abraham's next generation. Sarah was pretty pivotal in like shaping the Jewish family tree there, but she didn't have any public role or any public power at all in her Jewish family. They're kind of the Israelites becoming Jewish. Same thing with Rebekah. No public role, but we're about to get into the story of her choosing Jacob, who was not supposed to be the chosen one. and really taking an enormous amount of agency in shaping the next Jewish generation. Enid.
Yeah, I think most of us read The Red Tent. And if you look at that, Rebecca, when she was pretty strong and she was in charge. She wasn't always very nice to Rachel, as I recall. It's been a little bit since I've read it. But among the women, and who essentially were important, obviously, in every generation, she ruled the roost, and she wasn't always very nice, as I recall. So within that framework, her strength, her what was she expected of others in terms of being beholden in many ways to her, it was all there. And so she used it in that respect as well.
You're reading her as a pretty powerful person.
I think so. Mm-hmm. Now, some of that could have been a cover-up for her insecurities. I mean, she couldn't do it one way, so she did it in another. But I think that relates, to each of us. We grow, we hope, over the years, going from where women weren't respected, then taking things into our own hands when it was possible in later years. And I think she found her niche. And
power she could have. Okay, Diane, and then Susan.
I think with the public private power base, I appreciate this class because the opposing dynamics that you pose to us, to me, are the root of orthodoxy in our religion that I have found I chafe at, because I feel that it's some part of this private power, to me, has been used as the most obvious excuse to not let women have public power. And I feel I chafe at trying to lift it up because I resist it. I resist the idea that that's something okay about it. I understand on a human level, we all have those. Some women, people are not outgoing, but it's not because of shouldn't be because of their gender. And that's what I have trouble with, is that this box of private power is somehow elevated as a thing when it's actually means that they're not something else. And you mentioned it, but I'm just raising it up.
Really important. It's like almost like when there's that public-private split and women are supposed to be in the private lane where they're not resourced, but sort of are held up as the ideal in some way, but don't have any of the power. There's something really problematic about that. And we've identified that in our generations and said, no, we're going to transform this. But back then, she was one person in a big system. And it kind of looks like she found her way into a powerful position in that private realm, which is not to say there should be a bifurcation between the public and the private. But I think that's really important, Diane. It has not served us well to have those lanes segregated and gendered. Susan.
I think that as a woman who came from earlier times, like in the 50s and 60s here, and moving to where women now have public power, I wonder if Rebekah had some resentment and maybe even anger that she had to move in the private path
Hmm.
when there were many men around her, even men like her husband, who had plenty of problems, but still could exert power. And, I know as a woman who was denied that for a while in my own society, it made me angry. Yes, I could manipulate things privately, or she could put all her eggs in the Jacob basket and hope he's going to turn out to be what she wanted and help represent her desires. But there's still a hole of something's missing, like merging those two parts.
Yeah. I imagine everybody here has had these experiences. I just read the book Chasing Hillary about Hillary Clinton's press corps that was covering her campaign. And what you just end up seeing is that Hillary, who was an enormously competent, capable, smart person with good values, was up against so much judgment and sexism and, just belittling for just even, being a woman. And it was, so I think what you're saying, Susan, is really hard to see someone who's less competent than you, but is in positions of public power, moving ahead and advancing. And that was certainly Rebekah's status in life, was that she, didn't really have access to the official roles. And it must have been really hard for her to see other people who probably weren't as ready to lead as she would have been. She was a very strong and really empowered for her day person. That's what we keep kind of getting from these different pieces of her story. Of course, we have to imagine our way into a lot of it. But she is known for her strength. That is a quality that we are told about Rebekah, her strength in making her choice to leave her family in the first place, her strength in holding this wrestle, the tug between the twins, and then her strength in just making a big decision to shape the Jewish future, which we're going to get into in a minute. Anybody else here? Joanne, I see you are here, but I don't see your face. I just see your Zoom box. And if you are there, I will let you know. We have 12 people in this Zoom room. Okay. So now we get into this treachery that Rebekah actually led in order to make a better future for this family tree that she had sort of thrown her lot in with and committed to. So who wants to explain the treachery from the story of Rebekah and Jacob and Esau? Who wants to say, what did she do? How did she mastermind this upheaval? Because it's supposed to be that the firstborn inherits everything, gets the resources. Oh, now we see you, Joanne. Hello. It's supposed to be that the firstborn gets all of that and gets the blessing, right? Gets the blessing. And she completely turns it upside down. She has a massive intervention in the history of Judaism. Right? And we wouldn't even have the Jewish family tree. We wouldn't even have these matriarchs if we weren't living this story. Because in the next generation, the matriarchs come from her son, Jacob, the younger son's partners. Those are the matriarchs. So everything about this story at this point is shaped by Rebekah's choices. So what is it she did? Who wants to tell the story? What did Rebekah do that was pretty bold and brazen?
He switches babies.
Tell the story.
Jacob Harry.
Yeah. She knows Isaac's eyes are dim, the Torah says, because she can't see that well. So, but Esau was very furry. He had a lot of hair, and Jacob wasn't. He had clear skin. And so what does Rebekah do, Diane? Do you want to?
She makes him hairy. I think she puts a sheep's clothing on him or something. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. And she sends him to get the blessing, right? Basically to steal the blessing from her own husband, right?
Right.
And
Stop the steal.
stop this deal, man. You have to kind of ask. Here's this dad who couldn't recognize his own kid from anything other than touching his furry skin. You have to kind of ask what was going on with Isaac. Was he tuned out and missing in action, or what? Are you left with some questions about the papa here?
Uh-huh.
But the mama also was acting outside of their agreement to further her vision of what would be best. Now, I think in a lot of families, this happens in different ways. Do you know stories of like a founding entrepreneur who has kids who have kids and then turns the business over to someone that they think will be the best ones to run it? I know a number of situations like that, leaving out the others.
Uh-huh.
Who had kids with more special needs or who they just didn't see as the ones who should inherit the family business and take it into the future. What do you think about that? What do you think about what Rebekah did? She coached Jacob, her favorite son, the younger son, on how to steal the birthright. She plotted and planned with him. She coached him on this treachery. What do you think? What do you think?
Did he resist at all? Or we
No.
don't know?
We don't know.
We certainly aren't told he resisted. Karen Zeitz?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm at work, so I will be going in and out. But anyway, I just wanted to not to diminish whatever deviousness or whatever Rebekah displays, but sort of there's this theme in the Torah that the underdog kind of gets the prize, like David and Goliath. Joseph is like hated, he's ridiculed by his brother and sold into slavery, and he ends up saving everyone, the whole Jewish people. So it's like repeated over and over that the smaller kid, the younger kid, sometimes with a weakness or something, sort of ends up being the, hero or the winner. I think that's at play here. That the younger son is, there's just like a Jewish theme somehow about that. I don't really understand why, but it's definitely, I don't know, I was in some class where the, biblical class when the rabbi pointed this out, this that it goes all through the Old Testament.
You're right. And it's not just a Jewish theme, it's an archetypal theme. Because if you think about fairy tales where there's the king, always the younger son who some other archetypal message that the Jewish stories also pattern after, which is something like transformative things can happen. Disruption of fate can happen. It's not just inevitable that things play out, like human agency matters maybe, or I don't know exactly what, but it's telling you something archetypal that we're part of that big story as well. So you're saying Rebekah is part of a larger pattern, which is she wasn't just individually disrupting something, but she was part of a pattern of kind of transforming what you would have expected. That's
right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, do other people have thoughts about that? And how do you relate to Rebekah's choice to do this, to do the steal, to support the steal, even to mastermind the steal? Enid.
Well, when you look back originally to the fact that she had a choice as to whether or not to go to this new land, that says something about her family as well. Now, I don't know if in those days, because today the Orthodox, very Orthodox that I know, they're always matchmaking and all of that. And yet I can think of one family that I'm very close to that now live in Israel on the West Bank, where 5 of the 6 children sort of followed whatever was arranged. I mean, it worked out okay. The 6th one is now in his early 30s. He still hasn't found somebody that he's ready to marry with all the choices. So it seems that there's, you have however many children and each one is different. And, but one doesn't necessarily, or 2 don't necessarily go with the flow of the rest of them. And in this situation, it's surprising, but as much as the parents wish that we're different, can't make them marry somebody. And I can think of another situation in which our friend's son was 45 when he finally found somebody that he wanted to marry, and they're very happy. So
in this situation, Rebekah's helping Jacob steal the birthright. And
well, she was taking this, she was standing up for what she wanted and what she felt, and she was going to do it one way or the other. And I don't know if she had qualms about doing what she did at work. Yeah. Does anybody know afterwards what Esau's relationship with Rebekah became or was after she did that?
We don't hear about him and Rebekah, but we hear about him and Jacob.
Well, that I know.
Yeah. Okay,
But,
thank you, Enid. Let's hear what Louisa wants to offer.
I found it interesting the way they use the word hairy to describe him and then fury as to his emotion. And I wondered if the 2 brothers, because they talk about one being more of a hunter and one being more tender, you know, and I just found it interesting, hairy and fury, because sometimes you think about them together because a hairy situation can create fury in it, you know, and different things like that. And I'm like thinking to myself, she saw both sides of.
I think you may have gotten muted, Louisa, somehow.
She's not muted, but something happened.
We lost you. Well, I will say, building on what Louisa said that we heard already, there is a whole theory read into the story of Esau and Jacob, that it's about the transition from hunter-gathering societies to agricultural society, and that Rebekah is aligning with the agricultural settled sort of way of the future there by choosing Jacob. I mean, I think that's it's kind of interesting.
Rich.
A little bit much there.
But she also knew her sons, right?
She knew her sons.
They were adults at this point. So she knows her sons, and maybe, I mean, she had strong feelings about who should be the patriarch, the next patriarch. And, you know, Esau was the hairy hunter. And I don't know, he just seemed clumsy, like interpersonally. And maybe, you know, she felt that Isaac was the better leader.
Prescriptive, like people should kind of violate the pattern and take their matters into their own hands like that? Do you think it's
I personally couldn't do it. You know, that I'm a rules and law person. I follow the rules for the most part, but there's someone, that one is the big one. I don't think I do that. That was a big one.
It's a very big hobby.
So I'm thinking, my current thinking on this is that it's okay for Rebekah to do that if she also promotes, for lack of a better word, Esau in some other way. You know, gives him some responsibility that's important, or just makes him feel as important, but in other ways
Mhm.
to Jacob.
It's sort of like back with Ishmael and Isaac, the blessing will flow through both of them. Like
Yes.
God, Abraham are
Yes.
kind of understanding that they were going to change the family configuration, but the blessing will flow through both of them.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. You know, now with people doing 23andMe or genealogy DNA tests of different kinds, there are all sorts of family surprises coming to light about ways that women had babies with people who weren't the husbands and presumed fathers of that baby. Many, many stories of that. And this is probably the one generation where those stories will come to light, because after that, any woman making a choice like that is going to know it could be, you know, public. But in the generation that women up until now made those choices about fertility and family formation, they didn't think it would ever be revealed, because who would have known there'd be DNA testing? And it's a huge percentage of families have these kind of secrets coming out. Does anybody here? I know intimate stories of this. Does anybody else here know intimate stories of DNA revelations? Interesting. And has anybody here done your own DNA testing? Well, you may have revelations you don't even know about yet. And
Or
you
want
may or
to
may,
know.
I mean, you don't need to do that. But yeah, because I mean, in this case, Rebekah was helping Jacob steal the birthright. But in some other cases, you know, oh, Louisa's saying her battery died. Okay. Are you back, Louisa?
No.
Yes, I am,
Oh,
but I'm not talking anymore.
To finish your thought or not?
Just what I was just trying to say, that maybe she saw the both sides of her children in her husband, and the traumas and the different things, and she was trying to make sure that they were treated fairly, much like if we want to compare it to something today, Princess Diana and King Charles with William and Harry. Because while one was second, she still wanted it to be respected that they were both princes in both parts of the world, and both had qualities that could help rule the world.
Okay, yeah, we really don't know if she was committed to Esau's well-being. It certainly doesn't tell us that she was committed to Esau's well-being, so we don't know. But in the sort of hunter-gatherer versus agricultural theory that's mapped onto this, hunting and gathering was the old way of doing it. And, you know, living in settlements and planting and being agricultural was the new way. So she was kind of aligning with the course of civilizational development in that theory. I actually just read a really wonderful book, much more detailed than most people would probably be interested in reading. It's very fat, called The Dawn of Everything. But it actually says that that idea of sequencing the eras that way, of first there were hunters and gatherers and then there was agriculture, is all wrong. And the evidence from archaeology and anthropology actually shows that for thousands of years there was an overlap of hunting and gathering and planting, and people were kind of foragers and hunters and fish. They were a lot of things at once, and there weren't these eras. But it is interesting that you can read the Torah, at least some scholar did it, by saying that this struggle Rebekah was in was a struggle over, like, where is civilization going? Is it going back to the hunter-gatherer thing? At that time, this scholar and those fields thought these were clearly delineated eras, which they turn out not to be now. But anyway, just wanted to finish that loop of thought. So, friends, Rebekah did choose the child, for better or worse, to shape the future of the Jewish people. And she chose Jacob, and the Jewish line of the family tree goes through Jacob because of her choice. Esau becomes the father of the, I guess you would say, sort of Arab and other peoples. And there's, over the generations, more talk about that as well. Esau did not get a good connotation in our history, sort of like a bad guy. The children of Esau are not the good guys. And I think maybe what we're now doing is kind of reconceptualizing those kinds of all or nothing buckets. Like we've got the good son and the bad son. It's more complicated than that. And we're kind of learning how we need to put that family tree back together and become the children of Abraham again. Like Abraham started it all. We need to not have those bifurcations between the Jewish people, the Jewish line, and the others. That it has to at least be that there's respect and shared resources. So all of that, and we're going to do one final round of what, I'm going to let each person have a turn. If you'd like a turn, you can pass if you don't want to. What question, one sentence, what question would you want to ask Rebekah? And what is a sentence of wisdom you would like to have given to Rebekah? And I'm just going to call on people. If you want to speak, you can unmute and speak. Let's give everyone a minute to think. What question would you like to ask Rebekah? What wisdom would you like to offer Rebekah? And I'll start calling on people in a minute. Can I start with you, Bobby?
Sure. My thinking cap is on. So I would want to ask her maybe that's not the right word. What made her choose Jacob over Esau? Was it just his physical characteristics, the hairiness and that kind of thing, or something else that she saw? So that's the question. And the advice I'd like to give her is would have been to find a way to instill confidence and give each of them an important role according to their abilities.
That's great. Thank you. Evie. Yep, you're still.
If you had to do it over, would you have left your family to get married?
Nice.
And for advice, I don't like to give advice.
Okay, Susan Thompson.
I guess I would ask her what she felt when she developed this trickery, or after the trickery of getting Jacob to get the first blessings and so on by presuming he was his brother and so on. What kinds of reactions did she have? And for the future, do you have to, does she see that there's a way to, I guess my advice would be, is there a way to propel the nation, the peoples, into a better future, like you said, the agricultural stage, without doing plotting and trickery? Because she's setting up some kind of model that doesn't have good intentions in a way, because, in order to get to a better place, can't you be more forthright and develop it that way rather than just resorting to trickery?
Thank you. Enid, one sentence each.
I would like to know how she felt towards Jacob and why I think that would have a lot to do with why she felt she could do what she did. and advice. I don't know if I'm sure I have anything for that at the moment. I'll probably think of something later, but
On people, so I'll get to you in a minute. Joan, do you have anything you want to ask Rebekah? Or
No.
not? Okay, thank you. Roby. Roby? Okay, you're on mute, Roby, but we're gonna go to Beverly. Beverly, what would you ask Rebekah?
No, I would just question if she had worked a little harder with Esau. Maybe he had qualities, very dominant that she didn't see or she couldn't pull out, and maybe perhaps that was a tragedy that he was kind of shunted aside. Why?
That's right. Okay, Diane.
Well, now we're sort of coming onto the cycling into the same. I kind of agree with, I think it was Evie asked, why did you leave? Actually, I have a different question. What came up was, did you have a grand plan? Was this sort of a Greek story that you knew that this would affect Judaism, or was this basically just like that kid over the other kid? Because I'm still not clear after today's class. And the advice I think is along Susan's, which is that approach to problem solving is not useful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Karen.
I think I have two questions, but no advice. Just like what she felt were her justifications for making the switch. Was she only trying to help Isaac? Do I have the right person? Yeah, Isaac. Or did she have something, like Diane said, broad, broader and more far reaching? And the other thing I'd want to ask her is from her perspective of, say, now or after the fact, or say before she dies, was she happy with her decision, or would she not have done it from a farther perspective?
Nice. Joanne.
Aha.
One question, one piece of wisdom. But I think you might have muted yourself. I can't tell.
Oh, the audio now unmuted.
I'm unmuted. I would ask her, do you really think that because your husband's eyes are dimmed, that he cannot tell the difference between his two sons? Is it not possible that he was complicit with your game playing? And the wisdom I would attempt to convey, although I probably won't succeed, because she never asked to talk to me, is you think maybe you should treat your kids more equally. What's going on here?
Thank you, Louisa.
Two questions, no advice. Was the trickery worth the time that she lost with Jacob? And did her relationship grow with SU at all after Jacob left, since she was only left with one child and no husband?
Oh, great questions. Wow. Okay, so we had a lot of overlapping themes here. Could she have done this in a more honest way? Could she have really cultivated Esau's inner strength more, developed Esau? And was this part of a grand plan, or just a sort of situation of impulse in some way? And we will never really know. But Evie, we're actually going to wind up now because I want to do two closing things, but if you want to put your idea in the chat box, you are welcome. Let's do first of all, thank you all for really exploring the story of Rebekah in the second generation of the matriarchs. Next time we're moving on to the third generation and do our song and count the mayor while we're together today. Are we ready? for our teachers and our students and the students of our students. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. And this is the 25th day of the Omer, I do believe. Let me just think about that for a minute. Does that sound right to everybody? I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. 23rd. So it's like the Torah blessing, but al Sfirat HaOmer, or like the candle blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Sfirat HaOmer. This is the 25th day of the Omer. Amen. So folks, wonderful questions, wonderful wrestling with our matriarch Rebekah. Come back for next time. Thanks, everybody.
You
Thank
know,
you
if
all
she
again.
hadn't done something so outrageous, it would be so boring to read. This way it's like a soap opera and people want to keep reading. It's like, oh, it's not just me that comes from a dysfunctional family.
Yeah, it gives us a little grace for what we all do. You know what I mean? It's a little grace. Like it's hard to be human. She was doing the best she could, and we all are doing the best we can. And
Yeah.
Makes for a great read.
Thanks, Karen, for that.
love to all. Thank you, everybody.
And if anybody's looking to be uplifted a little bit this afternoon, the RRC graduation is at 2:30 and it is being live streamed. You can contact me if you need the link.
Enjoy.
Take care.